First of all, we have the U.S. Department of Agricultural Secretary Tom Vilsack from Iowa announcing the launch of the Atlas of Rural and Small Town America, an interactive map that, among other things, shows the distribution of population, jobs, and agriculture throughout the United States at the county level. Very cool map. Not sure who will use it or what business decisions or government decisions will be made based on this map, but the launch was announced. The Energy Department, Secretary Stephen Chu, announced the loan guarantee for Solar Power Inc. of Oregon, in which they will receive a loan guarantee of $197 million to continue their progress towards retrofitting buildings with solar power. The $197 million guarantee will create about 700 jobs and is part of an $18 billion in loan guarantees that have been given to companies that are exploring green technology. The Department of Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius announced the prosecution or indictment of 111 individuals participating in $225 million in Medicare fraud. Working with the other cabinet-level department, the Department of Justice, throughout the United States, 300 agents went and arrested and indicted several people who were participating in Medicare fraud, saying that Medicare fraud hurts all Americans. The Department of Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano from Arizona announced that she will be attending the funeral of Jaime Zapata, the immigration officer who was killed in Mexico last week. She cut short a trip that would have been taking her to New Zealand and Australia to attend and to speak at the funeral, and has declared that the resources of the U.S. government will work in conjunction with the Mexican authorities to find and prosecute those responsible for the death of the agent. Another agent that was with Jaime Zapata did escape injured but alive. The Housing Department, Secretary Sean Donovan, announced that a program that offered rent assistance to those affected by hurricanes in the Gulf Coast will continue through September. It is estimated that over 5,000 families received this rent assistance, although it hasn't been without problems in terms of difficulty in filing paperwork and getting the assistance that is expected. The Housing Department, Secretary Sean Donovan, announced that those affected by the Gulf Coast hurricanes during the last season would continue to receive help through the end of September. These are 5,000 families that it is expected to help. Although it hasn't been without problems, the $65 million plus program is there to provide rent assistance or rent payment to those who were affected by the hurricanes. The Department of Interior Secretary Ken Salazar was at a groundbreaking ceremony in the Everglades of Florida, where 55,000 acres purchased by the state of Florida will receive over $450 million in federal help in order to restore the area back to its original Everglade habitat. The area was originally developed near Naples, Florida, to provide housing for prospective buyers, but after that didn't materialize, the state purchased the land, and now it is a matter of destroying roads and canals that drain the water from the Everglades area and to get it back into its natural habitat. Of the many things being handled by the Department of Justice, one of the things that I found interesting was Deputy Secretary Tony West, the Secretary of the Department of Justice, or the Attorney General, as he is called, Eric Holder, spoke at a funeral this week. But Tony West gave a speech at the American Bar Association outlining some of the issues that were unique to the Guantanamo Bay detainees. And I want to read one of the quotes from his speech here that I think is significant and something I like. He says, "Janet Reno told me as a prosecutor, my job as a prosecutor wasn't to win as many cases as I could, but to do justice in every case I handled. I've seen that same spirit in the Civil Division team that deals with these habeas cases day in and day out. And while in doing our best we may not always get it right, I can promise you we always try to do what is right. And that, I believe, makes all the difference." His point being that it wasn't his job to win every case just because he had the case, but to make sure that everything was done right, including the reiteration of President Obama and the Department of Justice that they abhor all forms of torture and they take all claims of torture very seriously. But that some of these cases did warrant the prosecution of these supposed criminals. The Department of Labor had Secretary Hilda Solis, the keynote speaker at a workplace flexibility conference in Pasadena, California this week. This builds on a forum in March of 2010 that wanted to address issues that would help people in the flexibility of workplace environment for hourly workers. The Department of State, Secretary Hillary Clinton, left it to Susan Rice, the UN ambassador and a cabinet-level officer, to explain the U.S.'s sole vote against a resolution in the UN Security Council against declaring the Jerusalem or Israeli settlements as illegal. Although Susan Rice, Dr. Rice, proclaimed that the U.S. kept its position that these settlements were illegitimate, it voted against declaring them illegal at the UN level. The rationale of Dr. Rice and the position of the United States was that this resolution would not help parties get to the negotiating table, and therefore voted against it. It was the sole vote against the resolution passed or voted for by everyone else on the Security Council. The Transportation Department, Secretary Ray LaHood, announced the opening of a West Coast facility for dismantling obsolete ships. There were about 250. At one point, there were over 300 of these ships that had been mothballed since the 50s, but just sat there and were actually starting to pollute the waters. With the opening of this facility on the West Coast in Vallejo, California, about 100 jobs will be created, but also there will be some expense saved in not having to transport them through the Panama Canal to Texas. This will actually be a significant monetary commitment to actually cleaning up these ships, which before had just sat there actually creating more toxic waste as they had been mothballed since the 1950s. The Treasury Department, Secretary Timothy Geithner, was at the G20 to give a speech. The majority of the speech was about exchange rates and how to get the free-flowing exchange rate to allow the currencies to float according to market needs instead of to the needs of the individual countries. That was the majority of the speech. But there was something else, a small part of the speech that I thought was worth reading it directly. I don't know if it's true or not. I haven't looked into it. But if it is true, it is interesting that it hasn't caught a lot of attention. The thing that he says here, among many points, he says, fourth, the durability of the expansion will depend in part on the ability of advanced economies to deliver credible multi-year reforms to restore fiscal sustainability, including the United States. G20 leaders committed in Toronto last June to halve fiscal deficits by 2013 and to stabilize the debt to GDP ratios by 2016. The budget that President Obama submitted to Congress this past week meets these commitments while protecting the key investments in education, infrastructure, and innovation necessary to strengthen future economic growth. So what I think would be interesting to explore is the commitment that we made in terms of our budget, relationship to GDP, the projections on GDP and revenues that this is adhering to, and really, did we commit to get this down to sustainable levels by 2016, and are we on track to do that? Very interesting research project to take on. The Veterans Administration, Secretary Eric Shinseki, announced at the anniversary of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, or the stimulus bill, and announced things that they had been doing. They announced that they had spent $1.3 billion in upgrading facilities. There's over 1,100 VA facilities throughout the United States, and one in every single state. Some of these, and this might be interesting, a third of the money was spent on energy renewable projects such as solar paneling. Some were as mundane as replacing boilers in hospitals that needed them. The Commerce Department, Secretary Gary Locke from Washington, announced the rolling out of 2 more Commerce Connect offices where cross-trained personnel from the Commerce Department are there to assist businesses, connect with other businesses and departments throughout the United States government. The new offices announced on Friday, the 18th, were in Los Angeles, San Francisco. This is after the initial Commerce Connect office that evidently had a successful pilot in Michigan in September of 2009. The Department of Defense, Secretary Robert Gates, announced on Friday the 18th the sentencing of Noor Mohammed, a Guantanamo detainee who admitted guilt for giving assistance to al-Qaeda in terms of weapons training. He was from the Sudan. This plea agreement said that as long as he continues to help the United States, he should serve no more than 34 months, but that if he stopped or gave false information, the full 14-year sentence could be implemented. The Department of Education, Secretary Arne Duncan, who's not involved in a visit out to Puerto Rico this week, where all meetings are being held to determine whether the Department of Education in Puerto Rico is complying with the program from the Department of Education. There have been a myriad of problems with compliance, although the press announcement announced that they are pleased with progress that is being made. Meetings this week will determine whether they are indeed in compliance and will continue to receive aid. That concludes the roundup of the 15 cabinet-level departments and things that they have announced and things that have been happening in their departments. I think some of them are worth exploring more. In particular, I'm interested in the sole lone vote against the UN resolution to declare the Israeli settlements illegal. What why we did that, although we announced that we declared that these settlements were illegitimate. Voting against the resolution to declare them illegal is an interesting diplomatic doublespeak. Also, I think the Timothy Geithner's speech at the G20 declaring that we were on the path to adhere to the things that we had agreed to in Toronto. I'm not quite sure the details of what we had agreed to or how it is that we are on the path to adhering to those agreements. Those things would be interesting to explore. Of course, of the 15 departments, we could spend endless amounts of time on any one of those. Until next time,